Web design just in Photoshop, no coding. Back in the day when you said you were a web designer, people assumed you knew HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript, and maybe some other things besides Photoshop. Slowly, things are beginning to change, and specialists are being looked for. That's why I decided to use my time in what I considered the wisest way, and that is focus on a particular field, master it, then diversify my skill set. Nobody wants a handyman that does it all. They think they do until they see the end results, which are usually mediocre. There are only so many hours in a day. If I were to split my time among all these skill sets, I'd progress very slowly. So instead, I've focused 100% of my time on Photoshop. This way I can learn much faster and become highly skilled in less time. Would it be great if I knew how to code? Well, who said I don't know how to code? I don't do it often, yes, but I have the basic knowledge, albeit not at the same level I know Photoshop. I choose to further refine my design skills because that's what brings me the most pleasure, and of course money. When I consider I have the time, the energy, the need, and the passion to start coding at a high level, and then offer my skills for hire, then I'll do it. But it's not a must. Nowadays, there are lots of specialized agencies that do PSD to HTML conversions at incredibly low prices. They also offer PSD to WordPress, Joomla, or whatever else you can think of. Besides those agencies, there are people just like me, but on the other side of the fence, that just code. That's what brings them joy, that's what they love doing, and they're great at it. So there's no real need for you to do both things. What people are looking for is specialists that can do one job amazingly. So learning how to code is an option everybody has, and you should make that choice for yourself depending on what you want. So the essence of it is this: you don't have to know how to code in order to be a great web designer, but it's important you understand what can and can't be done. I'm talking about certain super creative layouts, certain features you imagine in your mind that can't be implemented by a coder in an optimal way or actually at all. You need to know the basics of web design programming so you won't find yourself in situations where the client can't use your design because of coding limitations. You'll see some examples later on in the course. If you already have some experience in coding websites, then no worries. This course is still very much relevant for you too. If you don't know how to code but you're watching this course, I think that's the best way to go about it. I believe the general consensus is that learning to code is easier than learning how to design. Some people might disagree, of course, but that's what I've found out through my own work and from talking to different people. So don't get distracted by the coding side. That's an option you should pursue if you really want to, but it's not needed in order to be a great web designer or to make some serious money. System requirements and best settings. Before I get into any details regarding your system and settings, I'd like to talk about a desktop computer versus a laptop. While I understand the need for a laptop for people who are often on the move, you should know that having a desktop workstation is the best way to go. Dollar for dollar, there's no competition regarding performance. Desktop computers have great value and are easily upgraded. RAM memory is cheap, so you can add more as your needs increase. You can always get a better cooler, so you can overclock your processor and displays. Well, they're crucial, so being able to replace them with a better model is quite important. So as a rule of thumb, invest in a powerful workstation, and if your budget can handle it, get a laptop for when you're on the go. If you're unsure about the difference in performance, I recommend you visit the following link. It will be attached to the course, so you don't need to write anything down. Here you'll see there's a huge difference between mobile and desktop processors. So don't be fooled by a laptop that has an i5 or i7 processor. It's not necessarily the powerhouse you might have in your desktop. These chipsets need to be toned down a lot in order to preserve battery life and keep things mobile. Just think about the size of a regular cooler. Where could that possibly fit? And the answer is, it doesn't. By lowering the performance, the heat dissipated is considerably less. So by all accounts, the entire system, not just the processor, is a lot slower than the desktop equivalent. And in case you don't want to follow up that link, I'll sum it up really fast. The article says that a £90 or $140 fairly low-end i3 desktop processor outperforms a seemingly beefy i7 which is placed in a gaming laptop, the Alienware M17X, which costs around £1,500 or $2,300. If that's not enough, the popular and fairly cheap i5 2500K beats the mega laptop as it is. When you overclock, it simply blows it away, hands down, no competition. I think you get the general idea here. You should also visit the following link. Here you see how much of a difference there can be between two processors labelled i7. So for all these reasons, I recommend you ditch your laptop and get a strong desktop workstation. Then if you have the extra cash, you can go mobile. Okay, let's move on. Regarding your system, you should have at least 4 GB of RAM, 2 GHz of processing power, and 50 GB of free space. You should be running a 64-bit operating system and a resolution of 1920 by 1080. We'll go into a discussion about Photoshop versions later, but anything above CS4 will do, even if it's a trial version. I'm using Windows 8.1 and Photoshop CC 2014. So I'm not using Photoshop CC, it's Photoshop CC 2014, a version that was launched at the end of June 2014, and it was a free upgrade for those who had a Creative Cloud membership. Now let's go into Photoshop settings and set things up. Go to Edit, Preferences, General. From here we'll start changing some things, though most of these are just personal preferences. Under Interface, I like to use the second option, the dark grey one, even though I've spent years using the now old grey interface. I find it easier on the eye and it's less distracting. In file handling, set your automatic save recovery to every 5 minutes. No matter how good your computer is, it will crash from time to time. This feature will constantly save your work, and in case something happens, say a power outage, next time you open up Photoshop, you'll have all of a restored version of your project, the last one saved by the program. By setting it to 5 minutes, you're likely to keep most of your progress. It's a real lifesaver. Underperformance is the real magic. Set your RAM memory usage somewhere between 80 to 90%. This way you won't find yourself in a tricky situation when working on a larger project. This seems to work best for me, but I try and keep my multitasking to a minimum. For the history states, I like to have between 20 and 50. This refers to the number of steps you can go back. So if you mess something up, you can use the history panel to backtrack. For web design, it's unlikely you'll ever need more than 10. But if you're designing a custom graphic, an illustration or something of that nature, those extra steps may come in handy. For cache, I recommend you use tall and thin, since we'll have loads of small layers and this is the best option for it. One thing to note is that if you put more history states, it will slow down your computer. When I had a low-performing PC, I actually set the history states to 5. What you can also do, if you have an older system, is have less resources loaded up. Gradients, patterns, shapes, brushes, layer styles. If you have 2,000 of each of these, your system will struggle to keep up. Only load a few of these and you'll notice a difference on a slower workstation. Have your Use Graphics Processor option checked, and regarding Scratch Disk, the deal is this. When Photoshop runs out of RAM, it will use empty space on your hard drive to move things along. This is why I mentioned you should have at least 50 GB of free space. If possible, get an SSD to use as a scratch disk. The key here is not to install PS on it, since it won't do you any major favours. Sure, it might launch a second or two faster, but the real performance boost is felt when you set it as a scratch disk. I know that's a bit hard to accept, buying an expensive SSD and then leaving it empty, but it does make a difference. You also need to keep your SSD drive at least half empty. That's what lots of tech people recommend. It seems the more you fill it up, the slower it performs, which actually makes sense. I personally use an SSD card from Samsung, the 840 Pro series, which was and may still be one of the fastest SSDs out there. I've set it as my first scratch disk. You can select it and then use these arrows to the right side to change the order. Lastly, under units and rulers, I like to have both my rulers and type in pixels, not in points. That's really going to help us, so make sure you set it. The rest can stay the same. Just one quick tip before we continue. If you're thinking about improving your system, then get more RAM. First, you should check this option out. Click on this small arrow icon here and select Efficiency. If it's under 100%, then your computer could use more RAM, and since it's cheap, it's a pretty standard upgrade. For those enthusiasts out there, from my research, I like to point out that a higher frequency RAM memory won't do anything major to your performance. So anything above 1600 MHz is just going to hurt your wallet. That's about it about your hardware and software needs and settings. We're now good to go. But just in case you're wondering, here's my current computer. Since the course took so much to make, I've actually changed systems. Here's my new spec sheet. This is mainly for those who are computer enthusiasts. I can't say I'm a fanatic myself, but I enjoy comparing component specifications, choosing the best ones and improving my workstation. I thought I should put those out there just in case anyone was curious. Okay, that's about it for this chapter. Let's move on. Color management. You previously saw I used Spider 4 Pro to calibrate my monitors. I actually returned this colorimeter because the results were non-existent on my Dell displays. I used it on several cheap monitors that had TN panels and there were improvements, but since my main displays didn't benefit, I returned the product. In case you don't know what a colorimeter is, it's a physical device you attach to your monitor. It comes with a software that helps you save a color profile that will then be loaded every time you start your computer. This brings us to color management, which is a very geeky, intricate and somewhat complex subject. Those who work in print have a terrible time with this subject because of the amount of information they have to work with in order to get the best possible rendition. I won't go into lots of the details because frankly I don't have a full grasp of this subject either, but I will tell you my conclusions regarding web design. First, we start off with color spaces. A color space, or gamut, simply means a subset of colors or a group of colors, if you will. The standard in web design is sRGB. That means standard red, green and blue. By combining those colors, we get every other color. sRGB has been acknowledged by the W3C, the Worldwide Consortium, which is the main international standards organization for the web. So if they say sRGB is our best bet for optimal color rendition across several million display, then we'll trust them. All browsers support sRGB, even Internet Explorer. sRGB isn't the widest color space out there, meaning it doesn't contain the most amount of colors possible. Adobe RGB 1998 or Pro Photo RGB are far bigger, but these aren't useful in our web design projects. The idea is that the colors would be far more saturated in those gamuts. You know when you want to get the brightest red, you go to the top right of your color picker, right? Well, imagine if you could extend that panel so you could go higher. That's the best metaphor I could come up with to illustrate what that would mean. But since most monitors aren't capable of such renderings, it's pretty much useless for us. For print, that's another story. So, to sum up this part, for web design, we're going to use sRGB, and for that we need to set a few things in Photoshop. Go to the Edit menu and select Color Settings. Here, make sure for RGB you have sRGB selected. Then underneath, make sure you turn off all these color management policies, so that if you open a document with another color mode, that doesn't get preserved. Then, when you want to export your work, don't use Save As and then select your format from the list. That's not ideal. Instead, use Save for the Web, which has a hotkey of Ctrl-Alt-Shift-S. I know that sounds complicated, but you'll get used to it fast. So that's Ctrl-Alt-Shift-S. If you look at your keyboard, you'll see it's easy to remember. From here, I recommend you use PNG24 because that's a lossless format, meaning you won't lose any quality like would be the case with the JPEG format. In general, this means your file size will be considerably bigger, but there are programs like PNG Gauntlet or sites like tinypng.org that will help you lower it. You'll be amazed how good a job they do, and the quality is virtually identical. Going back to this panel, it's important you don't embed any color profile and you keep your preview at Internet Standard RGB, so you'll have an accurate rendition of what it will look like on the web. One last thing. You can go into View and check Proof Colors. Then go to View proof setup, and make sure you have Internet Standard RGB selected, and that's the final bit. I tried to make this color management section as painless as possible. There are still folks out there that believe you should embed a color profile into your images, or that you shouldn't check Convert to sRGB when exporting, and that you should use your own monitor's color profile. But those are very few, and they're clearly a minority. What I presented here is the general consensus, and this is what I recommend. 1 to 2 years ago, when I created my previous web design course, I was reading into the subject, and at that time, I may have recommended you uncheck Convert to sRGB. That's because of some of the debates and articles I came across that presented that might be a better option. Now the standard is much clearer, so please use this fresh set of information. It's very unlikely to change. This particular subject is, like I previously mentioned, quite vast and hard to go through. So if you wish to find out more about it, feel free to go to Google and search for Gamut, Color Management for Web Design, sRGB, and so on. The best settings for web design were already covered here, and additional info won't improve your designs, but it might improve your general understanding of color management. Next, we'll compare Photoshop versions, because I know you may be wondering if yours is good enough for this course or for your projects. Piracy and stealing. I'd like to address piracy because I believe it's fairly related to web design. I'm not okay with it by any means. I've sold content in various forms, and it's disappointing when you see people steal your work. It breaks your heart knowing how much you've worked for it. Take my first course. 4 months in the making, a crazy amount of hours and effort put into it, and then someone just steals it. I like to look at it like this. If you're using a pirated version of Photoshop, then do your thing with it until you can afford the real program. You know why you should buy it? Because it's worth it. Because this is how you support the developers. So let's make it clear. If you like the product, you should buy it, no matter if it's a game, a music album, a program, or a tutorial. If you stole this course from a torrent, then look through it, see if it's worth the money, and pay for it, even if you've already seen it. Speaking about value, Adobe's Photoshop is surely worth the money. I'm paying around €70 per month for the entire suite of programs. If you're making at least twice that per month by using their programs, then you should buy it. Same for my course. If its contents bring you more knowledge, money, or projects, then you should buy it, even though you may already have it. So to sum it up in one sentence, if you think it's worth it, pay for it. Another aspect of the problem is stealing and not realizing it. Whatever you see on the web is copyrighted. For example, if you see an article somewhere, whether it's on CNN's website or on some obscure blog, it's the same thing. You can't simply paste it into your own blog and benefit from it. Even if you post the source, that's still not okay. That's stealing. But people may think it's okay just because, hey, it's CNN, it's virtually public info, right? No, actually somebody wrote that article and you're taking something away from their work. Regarding web design, this happens a lot with freebies. You've most likely seen PSD freebies everywhere. From small buttons to complete websites, from fonts to complete user interfaces. These are called freebies, but some are not free at all. What makes the difference is the license. That's your guide. That's what you're basing your decisions on. If it says free for commercial use, go for it. If it says you need to credit the author, do that. If you can't find the license, then don't use it. Don't assume that no license means do whatever the hell you want. That's not how it works. People post, repost, and repost the reposts. So even though you may end up on a website that gathers freebies from all over the net that states all freebies are free for commercial use, that may not be the case for each item. Be very careful. Even though you may not think of it as stealing, it's still using someone's work without their permission. So always check for the individual license for each file. That's about it. I don't want to lecture you about morality and things of that nature, that's all on you. But I thought it's important I share my views before we step further. Monitors. Best panel types, resolution, brand, size. When choosing a monitor for web design, you have to know what to look for. You'd be surprised how many designers buy their displays for the wrong reasons. The number one mistake is buying a monitor based on its design. Never choose one because it looks cooler than the rest. A very slim bezel looks nice, but that's as far as it goes. It won't bring you any extra projects or improve your skills. The specifications are always what matter the most. Another reason is bloated features. TV tuner, built-in speakers, USB ports, you name it. You might like some of them, hell I do, but those aren't what matters most in a high-quality monitor. Response times 2, 5, 8 milliseconds. The truth is, if you're a professional designer and not a professional gamer, it really doesn't matter that much. Here is my take on what you should look for in a monitor. 1. Choose a high-quality panel. The panel basically determines how good your monitor is. TN panels, short for Twisted Pneumatic, are the cheapest ones and the most widespread because of their affordable prices. Sure, they have fast response time, but that isn't the highest priority for a designer when working. These are great for shooters or quick reaction circumstances that occur in professional gaming, but the color rendition and viewing angles are quite poor on this panel, and that will distort your perspective on your designs. VA panels, vertical alignment, are the mid-range choice, though they aren't very popular. Price-wise, they're significantly more expensive than the TN ones, but when it comes to their performance, they just aren't good enough to justify their cost. Sure, they're overall better than TN panels, but their price point is usually close enough to the next type of panel, the IPS. IPS monitors, in-plane switching, are your best choice when it comes to price versus performance. They're usually a bit more expensive than VA panels, but the difference in performance justifies it. You'll get accurate color rendition, great viewing angles, and when you compare a TN to an IPS, you will understand what a difference it makes. Super IPS panels are the newest and latest thing. The idea is to get a faster response time and better color rendition while keeping everything at a low price. Currently, there are only a few options, but in the months to come, we'll be hearing more about this type of panel. There are other panel types, but nothing that's mainstream, so for that reason we'll stick to these ones. I have to mention that 4K displays are pretty much useless for us, so take that off your list of reasons. 2. Choose an appropriate size. Bigger isn't always better. Don't sacrifice your display's performance for a slightly larger one. If you want to watch movies or play games on a large monitor, you're better off buying a TV. A device that's good at everything is usually mediocre at performing all of those things. For example, if you have to choose between a 22-inch IPS monitor and a 27-inch TN one with a built-in TV tuner and speakers, you should choose the first one. That is, if you're serious about your design career. Also, regarding size, it's far better you go with 2 displays rather than using a super wide one. That's more of a personal preference though, but keep that in mind. 3. Check what connectors it needs. You wouldn't think connectivity should be an issue nowadays, yet from store to store, from brand to brand, from model to model, things vary drastically. Consider the following when browsing for a monitor. Do you plan on adding a second or third one to the mix? Are you going to use an integrated graphics card or a dedicated one? What input slots does your video card have? Does the monitor come with the cables included, or do you have to buy them separately? Will you need an adapter, for example from DVI to VGA, from HDMI to micro HDMI, and so on? Answer these questions before you buy anything. Adapter cables are usually pretty expensive and they're quite a pain. I've had serious trouble with my graphics card with my previous setup, so believe me, you should take your time to check things thoroughly. 4. Calibrate your monitor. Calibrating is the last step in this list, but not because it's the least important. Far from it. Calibrating your monitor properly can make a huge difference and can save you loads of money. High-end monitors usually come pre-calibrated, though that's not a rule by any means. Some come with a calibration tool like Spider 4 Express, which will help you achieve the best possible colors from your display. That only applies to expensive models though. I've previously mentioned I used the mid-range Spider 4 Pro and it didn't work well on my personal monitors. If you're using a TN panel, then you might benefit from it. The device costs around €200 and that's quite expensive. I'd say it isn't justified unless you're already making quite a bit of money from your designs. I tried the Pro version instead of the Express one because the device actually measured the ambient light and I thought this increased the chances of getting a good calibration. Sadly, it didn't seem to help. I'd also like to point out that monitors need to be calibrated often, every 1 or 2 weeks, because as time goes by, their colour rendition seems to change. Keep in mind, your monitors are as precious as your eyes. If you can't see right, you can't design right. One thing I get asked is this: if I design on an IPS monitor and the client sees it on a cheap TN panel, then what's the point? The idea is this: designs made on IPS monitors look good on TN panels too. Designs made on TN panels look different on other TN panels, and most of the time worse on IPS ones. I've once had a heated argument with a friend that said he liked a design I made except the greenish gradient in the header. All I saw was a grey gradient, and I didn't understand what he was talking about. We went on, and then he came to my house and he saw it through my own monitor. Needless to say, both our displays were cheap and thus rendered different results. So make sure you get the right tools for your job. In case you missed my computer specifications from a few lectures back, you might ask what I use. I have two 24-inch Dells. I've used Philips and Asus as well, but Dell seems to be the best, or actually the least worst. The models are very similar, so you don't need to get hung up on that. Why did I say the least worst? Well, like all displays, they have backlight bleeding issues and some ghosting effect. Overall, these don't affect my work in any noticeable way. Ghosting can be seen when you minimize a browser window and you still get to see its contour, but at 3 or 4% opacity. Let me emulate that phenomenon. Say this is my desktop and I have a folder opened. When I minimize, a ghosting effect would look like this. So it would first show the remains, if you will, of that folder, and then it will slowly disappear. Now obviously I'm using Photoshop to illustrate the point, but this is very similar to how it actually happens. This isn't something that's very upsetting because it's not obvious, nor does it happen often. Backlight bleeding can be seen, for example, when you have your lights off in your room and you have a black screen, say at the end of a movie. Then you'll see some faded lights, usually in the corners of your monitors. Depending on the resolution you're watching this movie on, these two effects may be more or less obvious, so keep that in mind. Considering all this, do I recommend Dells? Yep, I think they're a good choice considering their quality, value and colour representation. A very popular model is U2412M, and that's what I use. Do you absolutely need 2 monitors? Not at all. Yet once you use 2, you'll never want to go back to just 1. Having Photoshop on your right and your wireframe on your left is irreplaceable. One thing to note is that you should always get the exact same model for your second display. This is how to avoid any potential issues. And that just about covers our monitor section. I didn't talk about professional design monitors because all of them cost an arm and a leg. For that reason, they're out of the question for most people, so I skipped them. Okay, with that out of the way, let's continue. What you need to know about Photoshop. You don't need to know much about Photoshop for this course to be useful. In my previous material, Learn Photoshop, Web Design and Profitable Freelancing, I show you the basics in greater detail. Even there, I don't babysit you through every single tool and feature because of 2 main reasons. 1, you don't need to know all of them for your web design needs, and 2, you can find information, tutorials and free courses everywhere about the basics of Photoshop. Just in case you're a beginner and you're not sure about the tools I'm about to talk about, stay calm, things are pretty simple and you'll catch them as we go along. So, we have a massive amount of tools and options available in Photoshop. But luckily for us, we're only going to use a few. Let me do a quick rundown of what we'll use the most. Use V for the Move tool. This should be the default tool you'll revert to at all times. No matter what you do, after you do it, always go back to the Move tool. Why is this so important? Well, we constantly need to move things around, hence the Move tool. Besides that, we need to regularly select layers from the canvas. To do that, we press and hold the Control key and click on any objects whilst we're on the Move tool. This makes finding layers a whole lot easier, since you no longer have to look for them in this crowded panel. Spacebar. We use this a lot to navigate through our project. We'll usually have quite big projects, so moving around is important. Simply hold the spacebar and you'll see your cursor will change. Then click and drag in order to move around. Nice and easy. We'll use Ctrl 1 to bring our view back at 100%. Never make the mistake of looking at your project at a different zoom level. You can check that by looking at your bottom left of the screen. If you're just slightly zoomed in or out, that will drastically change the amount of details you'll perceive. It's fine to zoom in from time to time to get a better view, but always revert back to 100% with Control 1. Z accesses the Zoom tool, and it's really easy to use. Press once and you'll have your default setting from up top. In my case, it's Zoom In. Hold Alt to invert it, and now we're zooming out. Simple. Some users prefer to zoom in and out by using their mouse scroll. I don't advise you use that, since your mouse scroll can be used in conjunction with the Shift key to jump up or down the page. This is quite useful for long designs like blogs. Use U to draw vector shapes. These are our bread and butter. Without shapes, we wouldn't do anything. All these will be used heavily, so make sure you can easily cycle through them by using Shift U. Also, verify you have your Align Edges option checked, and that your line tool weight is set at 1 pixel. Lastly, the Type tool with the hotkey T. Without text, we'd have a mere image gallery, so this tool is very important. More on its functions and options when we arrive at the typography section. A few other things to keep in mind are the following. I don't recommend you detach tabs, since it's far more difficult to have a clear view on your design. I see this a lot with people that are using Macs, and I find it very distracting, hard to use, and overall suboptimal. Don't use Photoshop's Auto Selection option from the top left. If you want to easily select your layers, hold the Control key while on the Move tool and click on your layer. That will select it. Have this option set to Layer, not Group, and always revert back to it in case you temporarily change it. Give as much space as possible for the Layers panel. Maximize the canvas space by keeping the tools in one line and by not having your Layers panel too wide. Whenever you start working, double-click on the background layer to unlock it. When you want to drag a layer into another document, do so from the canvas, not from the Layers panel, otherwise it won't work. The difference between opacity and fill from the top of the Layers panel is important. Say we have an object on our screen with a stroke effect. I'll make it pretty big and obvious so you can easily see it. Now, opacity affects the entire layer, as you can see. 0% means it's no longer visible. I'll bring it back to 100%. Now fill. That affects the layer excluding any layer styles. So it doesn't do anything to our stroke, our bevel, our satin, or whatever effect we might use. That's the difference between them. Of course, color, gradient, or pattern overlay are exceptions. Another thing you should know is that Photoshop works with vectors too. I know most people associate vectors with Illustrator or Corel Draw, but Photoshop has them too. Shapes are vectors. So any rectangle, line, or custom shape you'll see with this particular thumbnail is a vector shape. If you right-click and rasterize it, then it becomes pixel-based. That means if you try to enlarge it, it will become fuzzy and blurry. This applies to everything you rasterize. And that's about it. Only a handful of tools are actually useful in our web design efforts. Sure, we may use others from time to time, but these are the absolute must-haves. Regarding the rest, I know I went through them quite fast, but don't worry. I'll explain them several times throughout the course as they're being used. I do recommend you go through all of these points at least one more time, so you're sure you've understood them. How can you monetize the skills you are about to learn? No matter why you're watching this course, you should know you have the option of making money from what you're about to learn. Before I present the options, I have to stress something quite a lot. Nothing beats hard work. It doesn't matter if you've inherited Picasso's genes or if you're as creative as a pile of rocks. In my book, if you work hard enough, long enough, smart enough, you'll become highly skilled at it, no matter your circumstances. And of course, money will surely follow. That's why I constantly advise my students to stop worrying about their computer specs, the amount of competition, their formal training or lack thereof, or whatever else may be holding them back. Work hard, work smart, work long enough, and success will come. Working hard without first thinking things through will keep you at minimum wage. Setting yourself up with a plan will greatly improve your chances of getting ahead. Be smart about it before you jump into it. Regarding working hard, people at fast food joints or on building sites or whatever job work hard too. That shouldn't be your only focus. Working intelligently but only in short bursts will be like drops in the ocean. Your achievements will be next to nothing. It's only when you combine the three for a long enough time that's the moment when you will see results. That's very important to understand. Now for the more pragmatic approach. Here are some of the options to monetize your skill set after you've become great at web design in Photoshop. You can freelance on sites like 99 Designs, Crowdspring.com or DesignContest.com. These are aimed specifically for designers who work only in Photoshop. Besides these ones, you also have Elance, Odesk, Freelancer, Guru, People Per Hour and a few others. My previous course is focused 80% of its 16-hour-long content on this alone, how to win design contests. You can easily earn at least $2,000 per month by entering and winning design contests. Learn more about it by watching that particular course. In these online platforms, it's critical you establish your portfolio and/or ratings. There's a black hat strategy going around where you get some of your friends to create fake jobs. They award them to you, they leave great feedback, and by doing so, you're creating an advantage for yourself when you'll enter real projects. That's because a client is more likely to choose a freelancer who has 3 or 4 reviews rather than a newcomer. Still, that's an unfair way of going about things. It's far better to give accurate, real-world prices and to double that with great communication skills. Once you get going, it's easy to be your own boss. Set up your own schedule and live comfortably by freelancing. The start is difficult, yes, but once you get going, opportunities will start pouring in. Another option is to create WordPress themes and sell them. This can be done in conjunction with a coder, or you can learn WordPress yourself. ThemeForest is the place to sell your themes, since it's a huge platform with loads of visitors and it's an established name in the industry. But just in case you don't want to give them a percentage, last I checked it was 30%, you can always start a website of your own and sell your themes. There's a lot of guys who do that, and you can make a living out of it. Keep in mind that designs for ThemeForest are very different from your everyday projects. We'll talk about that later on. You can always start your own business in the web design industry. Team up with an equally good coder, create a business plan, and get things rolling. This is more difficult than running a WordPress store, yet it's far more rewarding. If you don't want all that pressure, you can get yourself hired in an established agency. You might think that if you don't have any formal training in the industry, people will automatically shoot you down. But I've hired lots of designers in the past for my own businesses, and my advice is this. Keep a curated portfolio and always be prepared to showcase your skills in any test your employer might throw at you. If you have past experience and decent skills, people will surely be interested in having you as an asset. One piece of advice is to never get cocky. Don't ask for ridiculous wages from the get-go. You may be great at web design, but if you're interviewing at an agency that mainly does t-shirt designs, you're going to get a rude awakening. Your skills don't transfer over. You might know your way around Photoshop, but that doesn't mean you can do web design, logos, branding, digital painting, 3D work, packaging design, t-shirt designs, and so forth. So when interviewing for a job outside of your specific skills, please set realistic expectations. And in case the job is in your own niche, always show flexibility and willingness to learn new things. Last but not least, just in case you don't want to do any of these, you can surely use your skills to create your own website or revamp your existing one. You won't make immediate money out of that, but it will surely save you a pretty penny. When I work with any coders, I always provide the entire design by myself, plus I always lay things out in wireframes. This saves me a whole lot of money at the end of the day. What's crucial here is how good you are. As you noticed, I didn't go into lots of details about any of these options. That's what my other course focuses on. Instead, you have to know you have several options, but they all depend on the quality of your work. You don't have to be good. Strive to be great, and then things are bound to line up for you. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this course, becoming great at web design. Using a grid system. Using a grid system makes your life a whole lot easier, since it contains key elements that help you arrange and space elements out. The golden standard in web design was, for a lot of years, the 960 grid system, which can be downloaded from 960.gs. This was used because most monitors used a resolution of 1024 by 768, and nobody wanted a horizontal scroll bar. As you can imagine, things over the years have drastically changed and monitors have gotten bigger and bigger. Thus the question, should you still use the 960 grid system, or should you update to something like the 1200px grid system from 1200px.com? Besides that, there is also a strong alternative, Twitter's Bootstrap 3, which uses the 1170 pixel grid. This is growing in popularity fast, and it may end up being the new standard. So what's the answer among all these options? Well, it depends. I'm going to assume you're working for a client from this point on. If it's a site for yourself, the short answer is to use the 1170 or 1200 grid system. But for your clients, things vary. First off, ask them if it's going to be coded as a responsive website. If that's the case, create your initial design with an active content area of 1200 pixels wide. That's because it's easier to downscale, to shrink the design down, than the other way round. Active content area refers to the width of the must-have content that the user should see no matter what. In this example, you can see we have a canvas size of 1400 pixels, but the active content area has a span of only 960 pixels. That's the actual content area. The rest is so you can show your client how the site will look on bigger monitors. This actually emulates how it will look in a browser, and it's a simple way of improving your design's presentation. For tech-savvy clients, having a conversation about this subject is easy, since you can simply ask them what width you should use, whether it's 940, 960, 1000, 1100, 1170, or even more. To be on the safe side, we're going to be using the 960 grid with a canvas size of 1400 pixels wide. Unless specified otherwise from the client, you won't have many complaints about it. Having the 960 grid opened, you can see these columns. You have 3 choices, 12, 16 or 24 columns, and it's up to you what you want to use. I'll stick with the 16-column version. Why are they useful? Let's jump back to their site so we can see some examples. Simply click on the Show Grid button and you'll see some lines appear. Those are the columns we saw in our projects. If you scroll through, you'll see elements lining up perfectly. That's their main use. Besides that, we can achieve spacing consistency. As you can see in this example, we have the same spacing between each and every column. That helps a lot. Jumping back into Photoshop, we see some light blue lines that come inside this grid. These are guides and they'll help you position everything perfectly. To see them, simply press Ctrl::. If you're on the Move tool, you may hover over them and move them around. Drag them to the side to remove them and drag them from the side to add them. If you want to lock them, simply use Ctrl::. You might be wondering, what's this horizontal guide doing over here? That actually marks the dreaded fold. I'm forced to talk about it even today in 2014 because, again, older clients will ask you to put as much content above the fold. Back in the days of 1024 by 768, the idea was the user should see as much content as possible without having to scroll. So you should have your main information in this 600 pixel tall space because people apparently didn't understand there might be content underneath what they initially see. The term was actually taken from newspapers, where they were delivered folded, so what appeared in the first half of it determined whether or not the paper would sell. Obviously things have changed, yet again, some people may still insist on it. So that's the story about the fold, and we've decided to use the 960 grid system with a total width of 1400 pixels. Again, if it were up to me, I'd use a larger content area. But since this is a tutorial aimed for everyone, we're going to stick with the most used system, even though it's a bit old. Don't worry about it though, it's far more important you learn the principles of web design than to get stuck in some minute details. You can easily switch to any width you'd like to any grid, but that won't matter if your site looks rubbish. We have far more important things in this course, so please don't sweat it too much. So remember, to show the guides, use Ctrl::, or go to View, Show, Guides. To lock them, which I always recommend, simply press Ctrl::. Let's move on. Setting up your workspace. Photoshop offers quite a few customization options for your workspace in order to accommodate for different fields. If you're into digital painting, you're definitely going to have your workspace set up in a whole different way than for web design. Let me show you what works best for me. First, go to the top right and hit Reset Essentials, just in case you're looking at something completely different. Then press Ctrl-R to show the rulers on the left and top sides. From them, as you previously saw, you can drag new guides onto the canvas or, of course, remove them. Go to the top right of the Adjustments panel, hit this small icon and select Closed Tab Group. Then do the same for the Colors tab. Now we have loads of space for our Layers panel. This is going to come in really handy because in web design projects we have tens and sometimes even hundreds of layers. It's essential we see as many of them as possible so we can easily rearrange them. If you right-click on this small white thumbnail, you'll see we have several options for its size. I strongly recommend you use small thumbnails so they won't take up too much space. Next, go to Window, Character. We'll be using these non-stop in our work, so it's great to have it docked here. The symbol which looks like a Q is for your paragraph settings. You can actually access it from this tab here, but we won't be using it very often. I recommend you drag the A icon underneath the Q symbol just because it comes in more handy. The first icon is for the History panel and you should drag it down to expand it. Next, go to Window, Brushes, and that's the last of it. You might want to expand this Layers panel to the left just so you get to see long layer names. Other things to set up: check Auto Select in the top left if it's somehow selected. The same goes for Show Transform Tools. Uncheck it. Then go to View, Show, Smart Guides. These will help us position elements precisely. Let me demonstrate with two rectangles. Draw the first one, and then another one. Switch to the Move tool and move one of them around to see these pinkish lines appear. These help you position your elements based on your guides and other elements' position. That's a must-have. The nice thing is we get to save all these settings. Go to the top right and from the drop-down select New Workspace. Enter a name and save it. Now you can easily come back to your settings just in case you or someone else messes up the place. The only thing you constantly have to do every time you open up Photoshop is to lock your guides. Initially they're open, so you can easily move them around. Besides that, the changes we just made will remain as is. How to understand the client's needs. Clients want an expert, someone who not only talks the talk, but also walks the walk. The first thing you need to convey to your client is certainty. You must show you fully understand the requirements and/or the business's goals. This means you have to have read the brief carefully, listened to the client's description, check out the competition, and understand what are the most important points the website needs to showcase. Please make a clear distinction between being a web design expert and being an expert in that particular field. The client isn't looking for a business consultant. You don't have to know the ins and outs of his business to create an amazing website. You do, however, need to understand how the client makes a sale or how he monetizes his work. Let's look at an example. An e-commerce website, so a website that sells physical or virtual goods. Here you must act like an end user. What would you like to see in this online shop? What would improve your browsing experience? What's important to you when you make a purchase? Think of all the frustrating times when you wanted to buy something from a website and just couldn't find the search field. Or how about the complicated checkout or registration process? As you see, you don't have to overcomplicate things. You can use your past experience as a user and try to create an optimal experience for you. Let's take a look at a surprising example. Now I know some of you might be thinking, hey, this looks pretty good, and indeed it's not a terrible site, it's actually quite okay. The problem here is its atmosphere, by way of not understanding the client's wishes. The client wanted to portray a warm, personal feeling, but this design is very much upscale, professional and cold. That's why the job wasn't done right. This isn't a great website because it misses the point of the business and fails to create an appropriate setting for it. You wouldn't see a site that sells ski equipment using images of beaches and cocktails, right? It's the same thing here, but to a different degree. Here, I can remember the brief said the site should have a warm, personal feeling. They wanted to portray themselves as a one-on-one type of service, not as a serious professional platform. And that's why this site isn't great. It's not a matter of certain problematic design elements, it's about misinterpreting the brief and the client's wishes. That's why PSD freebies have their limitations. If you search the web, you're bound to find every single element you might need for a website. From logos to navigation bars to hero areas, testimonial sections, footers, you name it, it's out there in a PSD format. And even though they might look amazing by themselves, when you combine them, the end result is less than ideal because it's not tailor-made for one particular client. These are the things you need to fully grasp when you're designing the website. Let's take a look at another example sent in by one of my beginner students. This seems to be a website that's supposed to sell physical goods like shoes, clothes, handbags, etc. Classic e-commerce. Let's put the design aspect aside since we can all see it's subpar. So, is the site well thought out? Does it make sense? Is it functional? These are some of the questions that should pop into your mind immediately. You don't have to have years of experience to answer these questions. Simply imagine yourself buying something from this website. Let's take it step by step. First, the hero section, also called the banner or slider area. What does it say to us? Shoes. Shop now. Okay, and we get a picture of some shoes. What does this do for you? Does it incite an action? Is the space well used? The answer is no, not really. Though it does state you should click the button, it does so in a very crude fashion, without any elegance or style, and more importantly, without giving some type of incentive. Is this a special sale? Is this some type of promotion? What type of shoes am I going to see? Lots of questions, very few answers. If the purpose of this image is to send me to that category, that's fine, but it's not very well executed. I can actually do the same thing by using the menu on the left side. The only difference is that I have a picture as a background, but other than that, there's no real difference between the two. And there should be a strong impact if you allocate so much space for that action. The same goes for the other two images in the slider, which, by the way, is designed in such a way where you can only partially see the other two entries. This type of hero area isn't used anymore. Sure, the transition effect may be cool, but it's not very functional. It doesn't use the space effectively, since you only get to see half of the image. Does it actually span the entire width of the screen? I have no idea since I don't see any representation of the mouse cursor. Maybe when you hover over it, it will occupy the entire width, but who knows? Should the client assume it? That's a terrible road to go on. Let's move on. A call to action, also known as a CTA, must grab the user's attention and direct him to perform some type of action. In general, he has to click something. In this particular case, the button is black, which is a huge mistake. It should be a lively color and it should stand out. Black doesn't do that. We'll talk more about call to actions a bit later on, but the buttons move us to the next item on the list, the color scheme. As you can see, we have a green outer frame. Unless this is a pizza flyer, it has no place in a website design. Colored frames are put on cheesy restaurant menus, maybe on some business cards, but here it's very much out of place. The fact that the frame is green makes it worse. A color scheme should indicate immediately what's an action color, so when you see it you know you can perform a click, and what's the inactive color, which is mainly used for secondary elements, for backgrounds, or for other components you can't click. Here we have a pretty light and lively green that does nothing since it's used as a frame. It's also used as the down state in the menu, and on the other hand we have black, a dead or inactive color, which is used very poorly to attract attention. It doesn't make sense, it should be the other way around. The arrows aren't green either, even though they should stand out too. But on the other hand, the search icon in the top right is green, so this is a complete mess. Lastly, say you wanted to buy the red shoes, right? What size are they? What's their price? What brand are they? Do they have any particular discount? As you can see, this doesn't make sense yet again. Assuming you're not interested in these silly details and you just buy shoes based on an image, where's the Add to Cart button? Hell, where's any button whatsoever? You might assume that all these silly details will be shown in the product page, yet you have to consider two things. One, the client doesn't know that, and two, even if that's the case, Even if all this information is in the product page, you're making it very hard for users to quickly browse around and look at different products. Go to your favorite online shop and imagine if they did the same thing, if they hid all the information and just put a picture, actually a representation of the product, and that was it. Would it still be your favorite store? This is a classic example of not understanding the client's needs. We can put aside the poor use of colors because that can be attributed to the design aspect. But functionally, we are wasting space in the hero section. We're wasting space by having a very wide category panel, even though the categories themselves are quite short, and we're missing vital information for each product. Even if the color scheme was amazing and the images were far better and the frame was removed or maybe covered in gold, it really wouldn't change a lot since the designer failed to understand the client's needs. He didn't think about what it would be like to use a website like this, which is a huge mistake. This is why it's essential you put yourself in the end user's point of view whenever you can. By doing this, you're more likely to suit the client's needs. But what should you do for corporate websites where you probably don't have any experience? You don't have the slightest idea about corporate acquisitions, for example, yet that's what you're dealing with. Well, in that case, you revert back to the brief. There you should have all the required information. Combine that with some links from the competition and you have a strong starting position. But always think about A. What should the site's atmosphere or personality be? Should it be serious, playful, clean, warm, professional, etc.? And B. What does the client want from his website? And that can be several things: to make a sale online, to specify some information like working hours, location or telephone number, to have the user fill out a form, to make the user download something, etc. Use all this information and you're far more likely to design a great website from the get-go. Communication is essential. Learn English. Just in case you skipped the first part, I'll say this again. I'm going to assume from this point on you're going to be using your skills in order to work for various clients. This is obviously more difficult than working on your own projects, so that's why I'm going to speak from this perspective. So let's get started. The number one principle in web design you first have to master is communication. Apparently this has nothing to do with this field, but as you're about to see, you can't proceed with anything before you first learn to communicate properly. In web design, people are very frustrated when something doesn't happen their way. The client isn't happy because he's a paying customer, so he must be right. And the designer, that means us, isn't happy for a multitude of reasons. The major ones being, we think we know what's best, we don't like doing revision work, and we have pretty big egos. All this tension has to be managed and, if possible, avoided. This huge task falls on the shoulders of the designer. Yes, on us. And even though you didn't sign up for this, unfortunately, that's what's needed for every single project. The designer must guide the client at all times, and the only way we can do that is by speaking and writing in good English. This is essential because most employers will look to have a chat with you before they award their 4 or 5-digit project to someone they've never met. The initial impression you make must be outstanding, and the way to do that is by sticking to these rules. First, let's assume you need to reply to an email about a project proposal. Here's my advice. Always introduce yourself in 1 to 2 sentences and show you appreciate the client is considering hiring you. Don't act like he's doing you a favor though, or like he's saving your life by hiring you. It's one thing to be grateful and another thing to be desperate. Start each sentence with a capital letter and avoid any spelling or grammar mistakes. Use an online speller to make sure you don't mess up. I like to use spellchecker.net for long emails. Write in layman's terms, so don't use any technical words. Think about speaking to your grandmother if that helps, so don't assume the client knows terms like grid systems, responsive design, Google fonts, CTAs, etc. If you don't know how to spell a word, just type it into Google and you'll get the correct spelling. Use a semi-formal tone, not too serious since you're not a law firm, but not too friendly. The client is not your bro. To make this go smoother, make sure you have some of the paragraphs already written, so when it's crunch time you can simply paste them into your emails. Same rules apply to a Skype or Google Hangout conversation, but with a few other things to keep in mind. If you have a webcam, use it, but make sure you have an adequate background, so the client shouldn't see your dirty laundry or anything personal behind you. Make sure you have a decent microphone. There's nothing worse than struggling to hear someone, especially when they're from another part of the world and may not have perfect English. A decent microphone costs around $100, but it is money well spent. If you know you can't deal with the conversation, and this is very important, respectfully decline. So don't get into a conference call if you're just learning English. I know for some of you this may be childish advice, yet we live in a connected world and people from all across the globe are offering their services. That's great, but some designers simply don't know how to communicate effectively. I recommend you go to YouTube and search for funny Indian interview. Here's a short excerpt from it.
Hi, so tell me about yourself.
Sir, I am sitting in front of yourself, myself Rakesh Mohanty, and I am technology mad. But if you will ask me what is my passion, I will say hardware. But this is for the first time I am doing on Spiky.
Skype, you mean?
Pardon, sir?
As you can imagine, this seriously deteriorates your chance of getting hired. Some final things to mention before we move along. Anything that's important must be written down. For example, your terms should be sent in an email and they should look something like this. Total quote is $1,500 for one home page and one interior page. 20% paid up front, 30% after the end of the home page, 50% after the approval of the interior page. The final PSDs will be delivered only after payment has been made. The quote excludes any transfer taxes. This of course is just an example, but as you see, things are very clear. When the client accepts, he has to do it in writing. Afterwards, any revision work he may ask for, kindly ask for an email and then you can talk to him on Skype for further clarifications. Great designers are in constant demand, yet I'd say a large part of third world freelancers can't properly articulate 2 sentences. This is why so many clients are fed up with email replies like this. Hello sir, I do design very well. You want code? I code HTML, CSS, give Skype ID manager, want talk to you. Sir, we do good job. Please don't be one of these guys. Nobody wants to work with someone who can't speak English at least at a decent level. I understand some people simply don't have the means to learn. Don't think I'm judging them. I'm sure there are objective reasons why some people don't speak decent English. Yet for those who have access to learning material, there's no excuse. So that's about it regarding communicating effectively. Another aspect of learning English at a high level is that being a web designer means you need to be permanently in touch with the latest trends and news. You have to keep your skills relevant and up to date, and the only way to do that is by constantly learning through tutorials and reading articles. But see, if you're struggling with your English, this task will become much more difficult. So there you have it, 2 great reasons why you should improve your English skills. You might find this as a paradox, me advising you to learn great English, while I'm using Mark to narrate this course. The reason why I'm doing this is quite straightforward. I want this program to be top quality all round. I want you to focus on the content and not the packaging. And with that, we've wrapped up this section. To sum it up, remember the following. Besides working on your design skills, improving your English has to be on your to-do list. A website must tell a story and create an atmosphere. All great sites have in common one thing. They tell the same story from top to bottom. They create an atmosphere that goes hand in hand with the company image, product or service. This is a crucial thing to understand in order to up your quality level, but I'm afraid there's no easy, simple technique you can do over and over. This requires a lot of thinking and analysing, and it may be one of the more difficult tasks you'll be up against in your journey. But let's start out with a counterexample. Let's look at this website from top to bottom so we can see what we're dealing with. I'm sure your first impression won't be that great, and that's because this isn't a particularly good website. But if we break down each element and analyse them individually, you might actually consider them quite well executed. So what's wrong with this website? What's the main problem? The elements that don't work together, that's the issue. A common mistake amongst beginners is using several sites for getting inspiration, taking different elements and ideas and putting them all together. At the end, something feels off. This happens because you take a layout idea from one site, a colour scheme from another, a header from someplace else, and so on. The elements individually might look good, hell I'm sure they look great in the site you got them from, but in your project, nothing seems to go together. This is the situation here, even though, albeit this is a pretty extreme example. Let's analyze it. First of all, we have at least 4 fonts that don't go well together. In the main menu, in the hero area, for the service names, for the latest news and testimonials, and that shows up again in the footer. Secondly, we have too many colors. A detailed pink that features a bevel, a stroke, and a slight gradient, but on the other hand, we have 2 call to action buttons which are plain and simple. Then we have find out more in all caps, but then we have more that's written normally. Continuing with the shapes, we see a rounded rectangle up top, a square hero area, very rounded service images, and then square background logos. Up top, we have a menu that spans 960 pixels, while at the bottom, the footer occupies the entire canvas. The list can go on and on. This is a frequent problem I come across. It's almost as if the designers are working at 200 to 300%, and then they don't see the other elements in the site. The problem is caused by 2 things. 1, not understanding how to use inspiration, and 2, not understanding that each site requires a certain personality, a certain atmosphere. A good website must look great even from across the room, from where you couldn't possibly see all the details. It's all about balance. Let's take a look at some great examples and analyze them. This is a design made by Mike from Creative Mints. Can you tell what the site's about? First of all, you can tell this is for an upscale company, and you can sense that immediately from the beautiful imagery. Clients usually want to be portrayed exactly like women on Facebook, only the absolute best parts. So by using these big, bright, full-screen images, you convey a clear message of luxury and quality. Next on the list is the hero area. Usually, you're taught that call to actions are the most important things, meaning when a user comes to a website, he must be clearly directed towards something, whether it's a phone number, an email address, a form, a get a quote button, etc. He has to perform an action. Here, we don't have that, but it's far from a mistake. This company, alongside major corporations, rely on their websites to create an impression. Their major purpose is to communicate the company's position, values, and perhaps portfolio to a manager or a director that's looking for a partnership. So they don't rely on leads. A lead means a user who's left some form of contact information in the site and has expressed some form of intention of purchasing something. Companies like this have a totally different approach. Most of them cater only to other businesses, so such a call to action is a bit redundant. That's not to say you shouldn't feature any form of contact, but you have to tone it down a bit. Same thing goes for the lack of social media buttons. The company profile doesn't fit that scheme. I know large multinational corporations that use Twitter and Facebook, but that's an exception, not a rule. Here's another great example made by Mike. The use of imagery really takes this design to another level. The flowers that you see in the center are not chosen at random. They match the floral pattern at the top and at the bottom in the footer. They also continue the story underneath with Tom and Jess and Hugo and Ivy. By investing in his presentation skills, Mike has managed to make a great impression on his clients, and he's surely reaping the rewards. To further create the atmosphere of a photographer's website, he's using a serif font in all caps in a nice rich burgundy to create an impression of elegance and refinement. He doubles that with a bold sans serif font for the less important bits, but the combination works really well. Lastly, the color scheme is bang on. He doesn't use only one color like a lot of designers tend to do. Instead, he relies on a series of both complementary and contrasting colors. An example of the latter is this fairly bright blue that you'd think might not go well considering the burgundy up top. But as you can see, it looks great. I'd also like to point out this area right here, where we have a very nice use of texture. He didn't have to do that, but he did it in order to add detail. That scores a lot of points. The same goes for this symbol here. He could have easily left it out, but it wouldn't have been the same thing. So as you can see, if you break a great design down, you'll see certain techniques that you can use in order to achieve the same effect. What you can do right now is browse for great-looking websites and take notice of some of their elements. From this last site, I'd maybe try this combination of colours in one of my next designs. Maybe this oversized yet elegant ampersand symbol, or the simple main menu at the top. I'd also like to incorporate some texture wherever possible, like we have here. Those would be the main points I'd get by analysing this site. And they all come together in a cohesive design. That's what matters the most. If you want to achieve the same effect, you must first make a goal out of it. That's the essential step. You can do that by first understanding what makes a great website great, and this is the way to do it. You break it down into several pieces and see where they belong. Analyze each element and the decisions behind them, and soon enough you'll become more familiar with these concepts. Sadly, in this case, there's no replacement for experience. You have to look at hundreds of websites from top galleries, analyze and understand them. There's no other way round it. To further narrow your efforts, you have to get a couple of things too. Being consistent or creating a cohesive design doesn't mean you should use the same font throughout it, or use only one color. That's oversimplifying things. Of course, if you add too many fonts or colors, you're more likely to have a schizophrenic website, but there's far more to it. For example, we can focus on a website that uses icons. We'll take these 3 buttons as an example. As you can clearly see, each icon has a different style, and that takes away quite a lot from the design. It's these little things that you have to take notice of, because these add or subtract to the website's personality. So it's essential you use elements that follow the same design style. Here we face yet another problem, one that you might not pick up immediately. Considering it's hard to find vast icon sets, you might be tempted to take shortcuts. Meaning for services, we've used a briefcase, which works pretty well. For settings, we used a cog, which is fairly common. But for your account, we used a heart with a pulse. Let's imagine they were all from the same set, so they all had the same style. It still would have been okay because the icon just doesn't make sense. So what's the solution? Well, if the current icon set doesn't have an appropriate icon, then we need to find another set. Obviously, this takes time. This is why I said you might be tempted to use shortcuts, but it's not okay in any way. It's these small details that detract from your work. Another example is this one, where we have icons from the same icon set, but the sizes vary too much. You can clearly see the star in favorites is much bigger than the YouTube one. The same goes for the Twitter icon, which is smaller than the star, but bigger than the other one. Here's another case I'd like you to take notice of. We have several types of buttons in a website, right? This is obviously a bit exaggerated, but from time to time you'll see some of these cases. The button on the top has one particular gradient, the middle one has another type of gradient, and the last one doesn't have any styling at all. That's a major factor when it comes down to setting the personality of a website. Everything must point towards a single direction. You have to be consistent no matter what. In some cases, you may have 2 button types in a website, one for a major call to action and another one for less important elements. Is this combination okay? Obviously not, but it's not just a matter of red doesn't mix well with blue. The problem is the gradient difference. Let's take a look at the first one. Let me open up the window so we can see it better. Notice where we're positioned in the color picker in this area. We're fairly near the top right. Great, let's check the other one. This one is a bit higher up, but basically in the same region. Now let's jump into the red buttons gradient and see how things stand there. The left side, that's for the bottom part, is underneath the middle of our window, say at 40 to 45%. Now for the right side, we can see that's very close towards the top, so the gradient span is much wider on this one. This makes the button appear more 3D, if you will. That's another sign of inconsistency. So again, it's not a matter of blue versus red. The other button could have been anything. It's the difference in gradients that takes away from our design. So these are some examples where we blur the direction of a website, thus making it confusing. Now you may be thinking, if I'm consistent with my gradients and my icons, does that mean my site will look like this one? Obviously the answer is no, but it's a clear start. First we have to master the basics, and then we can move on to more elaborate techniques. Let's talk more about this subject in the next video to better illustrate things. Simple and clean or highly detailed. This is mainly a continuation of the previous video where we talked about a site's personality or atmosphere, whatever you want to call it. The idea is that you have to be consistent in everything you do, yet that's just the foundation. That doesn't guarantee your website design is going to be amazing. And I showed you this example made by Mike from Creative Mints. I'd like to show you yet another website design though. This is a site that helps you find a college. It's made by Suthan S. I hope I got that right, and you can see it on Dribbble. So let's take a good look at this site. My first impression is very good. I love this website, but as you can see, it's very different from the other one. This is extremely clean and somewhat simple, while Mike went for something very creative. Both sites have a very clear personality, and that's why they're great. They have a certain direction, and that's it. They aren't confusing. They aren't mixed and matched with random elements taken from the web. So now the question is this. If both sites are great, each in their own right, which one should you take as a guideline? Is it the simple, clean one, since it seems easier to do, or the complicated, intricate one with lots of details? And the answer is they're both equally difficult to create. Don't be tempted to think that a site's personality is dictated by intricately designed elements like Mike has done. No, I just showed you a website can create a strong atmosphere even without all the bells and whistles. So depending on your skills, passions and inclinations, some might aspire to Mike's design, while others may opt for PrepStart, the apparently easier one. I'm here to tell you that this second site is far from simple. I've noticed some of my students appreciate this type of website to a lesser degree than what Mike has done. I believe that's a mistake. Of course, Mike's design has more of an impact, but that's for a cafe. You couldn't do that with a platform aimed towards showcasing lots of information through which you'll then decide which college you'll apply to. This type of website requires a more professional approach with a huge focus on usability. They're very different beasts, yet both should be respected for what they are. This color scheme, these font combinations are equally difficult to what Mike has done. Some may disagree, yet when it comes down to actually creating a website like this in Photoshop, that's the point where you realize how difficult the task truly is. Back on the subject, we're confronted with two choices, simple or very detailed. I'll call it simple for a lack of a better word, even though that's not very accurate. You see, if you take any part of Mike's design and put it up on Dribbble, it would still make sense. It would still make the popular page. The logo, the hero area, this area underneath, all of it. So if you were going to single out each element, they'd still be gorgeous. On the flip side, the PrepStart design doesn't work in the same way. Sure, the elements are beautiful, but they wouldn't drop any jaws if you were to single them out. Let's take a look at this table here. It's very clean, it shows a lot of information in a non-cluttered way, and overall it's a great functional design. Take it out of context and it would still look pretty good, but it's when you put it all together that it all takes shape. So this type of website strives as a whole. Its strong point isn't custom graphics, creative artwork, amazing textures or anything of that nature. No, instead it relies on simplicity, white space, carefully picked font colors and sizes, consistent spacing between elements and so on. It shines as a whole package. Every element adds something to its atmosphere. Each element has a stacking value. Take them out and they're just okay. Put them all together and they're impressive. During this course, you'll hear me say you should focus on creating beautiful elements and only then move on to the other ones. That's my personal preference after all these years. Take it with a grain of salt because as you can clearly see, you can also design an amazing website with a well-defined personality based on the power of your elements combined. No Captain Planet reference here. So it's up to you to decide on which path you want to go. Ideally, you should be able to execute both types of designs, but there's only so many hours in a day, right? I recommend you choose a style, become highly skilled at executing it, and then expand to other styles. And if you choose to go on Mike's path, always revert back to this simple idea. If you take the element out of the design, would it still be beautiful? Would it be featured on Behance's first page or on Dribbble's popular page? By the way, in case you don't know, I'm referencing these two sites because here, the best designers show off their work. It's the cream of the crop and they're very well curated, so not everybody gets to be featured. So that's about it regarding this subject. It's one of the most important ones in this course, and I hope you'll understand why I insisted so much on it. I strongly believe this is how you elevate your design quality, by first understanding and then executing a clearly defined website that tells a story, the same story, from top to bottom. Inspiration is key for getting started. In the previous area, we talked about how important it is to understand the client's needs. While some of us may not have years upon years of browsing the internet and seeing thousands of sites, some may be new to the web, or maybe they've used it for very specific things like browsing on Facebook, using Skype and things of that nature. So how is this type of person supposed to use his previous experience to design a website? The answer is simple: inspiration. This actually applies to every single person who wants to design a website, no matter how experienced they are. But considering you may just be starting out, this is absolutely vital. I can't stress it enough how important inspiration is in your projects. So what does inspiration mean, and how do you apply it in your projects? Inspiration simply refers to having an idea about how you want your end result to look. To be inspired is virtually equal to having an image of the finished product in your mind. The real-world usage is this. You want to design a personal blog about cooking. The first thing you do is you go to google.com and you type in web design blog inspiration. This will show you lists upon lists of blog designs. You'll most likely see articles like 100 nice and beautiful blog designs or 40 inspiring blog designs. So there's lots to choose from. Then you start drilling through them and you'll be looking at color schemes, spacings between elements, image usage and so on. Notice I didn't say you should Google web design cooking blog inspiration. That's because you don't need to be that specific. You're looking for general guidelines regarding your project. You aren't looking for a specific design to copy. Far from it. There's a very clear line between being inspired by a color scheme and using those exact color codes in your design. After you've seen a few dozen blogs, you should have an idea about how you'd like your design to look. Then you need to take it to the next step and see what existing cooking blogs are doing. More often than not, you'll see terrible designs, but you'll get a sense of how they're structuring their content, if they have long or short titles, if they have large images and where they position them, if they have some type of rating system for the difficulty of the task, etc. So even though their design may be from 2005, they may have some functionalities you should take notice of. This is what the whole process is about. Getting inspiration isn't about copying someone else's ideas and calling them your own. It's about browsing around to see what are the latest trends, what are the most appreciated designs, and what they have in common. It's about teaching yourself to see those similarities between the best designs and implementing those principles into your own projects. As time goes by, you'll rely less on inspiration, but I'm sure you'll still use it. I still use it, though as you go along, you'll get more refined in the process. I like to use my keyboard hotkeys in order to browse around fast. First, I press my scroll on the mouse to easily open links in a new tab. Then I use Ctrl-W to quickly close the current one. And if I need to move to the next tab, I just use Ctrl-Tab. This may not seem a lot, but I put a lot of value on efficiency. I'll give you a few of my favorite places to get inspiration, though it's far better to use the Google technique I mentioned above. Dribbble is a fantastic place to get depressed about your skills. After discovering the likes of Creative Mints, I crawled up into a ball and cried in a corner for 3 days. I seriously considered uninstalling Photoshop and becoming a plumber. The amount of talented people you find on Dribbble is crazy high and it's constantly getting better. The areas vary a lot, so you won't find website designs that often, but it really gets your creative juices flowing and it surely makes you want to become better at your craft. But first you have to get angry about how great other people are and then put that energy to good use by learning, practicing and developing your skills. Behance has come a long way since it first got started. I remember a couple of guys from Adobe came and talked to me about it when it was just launched and I was very skeptical about it. Needless to say, I'm now eating my own words. Behance is a great place to find inspiration. ThemeForest is the porn of web design. What you see there is pure fantasy. It's a world where you can feature only 4 products on your e-commerce homepage and get away with it. Crazy amounts of white space, gorgeous product photos, creative layouts, you name it. Unfortunately, when you buy a template and then you start to adapt it to your real-world needs, you quickly find out how different your end result is. So even though that's an amazing place to seek out inspiration, don't get too crazy about it because lots of concepts can't be used in the real world. Awards, which for some reason I call AWWW Awards, is very similar to Theme Forest, but even more restrictive, exclusive and impractical. What you usually see are sites that make a huge impact through video backgrounds, huge photography on the homepage, super minimal design and things of that nature. Try posting sites like that on 99 Designs and you'll be in for a rude awakening. The Design Inspiration is one of my favourite places to get creative ideas. They usually feature fun, colourful websites that are the complete opposite of Theme Forest. It's not that they're very practical, it's the warm, personal approach that gets me. It's a great website to follow, and they actually have some other things besides website inspiration. I visited a few others, but you get the idea. I'd also like to quickly go through what I don't use. Template monster, never, ever, ever. I'd rather ask my grandma for advice. Google Images, I won't even go into details. Flickr, not relevant, not updated, poor browsing experience. And other places that aren't worth mentioning. So the main idea is this. Open up Google and look for inspiration for your project. Don't look for the exact fields because most of the time you won't find good results that way. Even if you get lucky, it's quite probable your client is familiar with most of them, so you'll just end up looking bad. After you've seen a large amount of websites from the extended field, say blogging, e-commerce, presentation websites, etc., then Google your site's competitors and check what functionalities you may want to include in your project. Never copy anything as is. Use those ideas and put your own touch on them. To better clarify this point, in the next lecture, I'll show you a quick example of how I get my inspiration. Hands-on, how I get my inspiration. Welcome to this hands-on section. Let's say I'm going to design a corporate website. The first thing I do is, of course, read the brief very carefully and think about the client's needs. I won't go into a specific case because each project is different, so I'll just run you through the steps like we have a real brief in front of us. I'll open up Google and I'll write Corporate Web Design Inspiration. Just in case my results aren't up to date, I can write 2013 or 2014 at the end. Alternatively, I can use these search tools to limit my results for the past year. You don't want to look at galleries from 2008. So we have our main results and we're going to start drilling through them at quite a fast pace. We're looking for something interesting, but I don't have any specific ideas in mind. The whole process is about brainstorming and rapidly deciding if a website looks great or not. I'm using my mouse scroll to open up links in a new tab. In general, we're going to see galleries, and each thumbnail requires yet another click in order to get to the final site. I've already pre-selected some results because your search may vary depending on when and how you do it. So my main links are these: webdesign-inspiration.com, vandelaydesign.com, webneil.com, dtelepathy.com. From the first link, I opened the first 8 sites: cacpro.com, optimo.com, campaignlabs.com, andy-wolf.at, viewbb.com, socialblood.org, micra.ch, brandaidedesignco.com. And now we're going to browse quickly through them in order to see which one stands out as a whole or if certain elements catch our eye. CACPro seems decent. Optimo is far too out there, so close it, it doesn't interest us. Campaign Labs looks nice. Andy Wolf, close it. ViewBB is too polarizing, meaning some people might love it, but some might hate it, and that's not okay with our corporate client, so close it. Social Blood is nice. Micra, close it. Brand Aid Design Co. is okay-ish. So now we have a filtered list of results and we're going to refine it even more. CACPro has this nice slider which uses a full-width image covered by a colour. In this case it's blue. I really like the way they combined the fonts up top. We might use that idea. What I'm not too keen about is the lack of lines in the first slide. In general, I like to have at least some elements line up. Imagine a vertical line at the left side and you'll see nothing lines up, not even the D and B from digital and branding. In total, there are 4 vertical lines here for 4 elements. That could have easily been 3 or even 2. So we might use this idea, but in a bit more refined way. I'm also going to inspect the element by using F12 or by right-clicking and selecting Inspect Element. This is a feature both Chrome and Firefox have, and it's really useful when you're trying to get some information about the site you're looking at. We can see the font is Muso Slab at a weight of 900. That translates into bold. By using this method, you're far more likely to see this naming system: 200, 300, 500, 700, 900. That refers to its appearance, and it translates into ultralight, light, normal, medium, bold, etc. By switching tabs, we can see additional information. We can notice the size is 73 pixels. Now don't be fooled here, I'm not looking at this tab in order to copy it pixel by pixel. I'm trying to get a sense of their thought process and their proportions. We can also mark they didn't use a drop shadow on their text because they have enough contrast from the blue background. We'll see if we manage the same thing. In general, it's better to avoid drop shadows because it tends to look more elegant. That was a lot to talk about, and it was just one hero area from one website. But I really want you to understand my thought process. Moving on, we see lots of space between these text lines. That's called line height in CSS, and in Photoshop it's called leading. We'll be sure to use plenty of that. Otherwise, we have these nice backgrounds, from blue to white to light grey to white to grey again. It really looks nice and professional. We might use that too. Moving on to campaignlabs.com. We have a beautiful font up top with 4 lines of body text. I'm dying to see what font they use. Let's inspect it. And it's Museo Sans 300 Regular, 40 pixels. Absolutely beautiful against this contrasting background. This may be the one we're going to use. Moving down, I really like this grid of icons. They're not very intricate, but the way they're laid out, the spacing, the font usage, the blue background, everything seems to be brought together very well. Notice they didn't use white icons. Instead, they went for another shade of blue. They didn't want them too bright, too outstanding, so that's something to note. No real footer, unfortunately, just a minimalistic one. Let's move on. Social Blood is a bit on the conservative side. The hero area up top doesn't win any awards, but it still looks pretty good. Clear call to action, decent font, but overall a bit bland. It lacks character, which might be a good thing for their particular cause. Scrolling through their site, I can see they use lots of white space with these 1-pixel grey lines. Let's check their colour by inspecting them. We can see border bottom 1-pixel solid CCC. This is why it doesn't hurt to know at least a bit of CSS. So if we're going to use some dividers, we know this colour looks great on a white background. Noted. Moving on. No footer here, but a strong call to action yet again with this Get Started button. This is present throughout the site. For us, that's not very helpful, since the client isn't looking for a site that generates leads. But in this inspiration process, you have to observe every detail. Finally, Brand Aid Design Co. I said this looks okay-ish because it's a polarizing website. This works great if you're a design company, as they seem to be, but for us, this vivid hero area is not going to work, nor will these otherwise lovely icons underneath. What I do like is this testimonial section. I like the red stars, the font usage, and the call to action. The arrows are a nice touch too. What I would change is the size. So if we do use this idea, we might make it more compact. And that's about it. This is where I'm going to end this video. The idea is you should continue to browse around and explore other websites. Get several ideas going. Don't jump on the first thing you see. I'd like you to send your comments for the next few sites. I know we don't have a complete brief, but let's say our client is looking for something like this. So a website that caters to other businesses directly, more of a presentation website. This is of course very image heavy, but the client isn't very set on that. He does like this page very much. So that's your task, to continue this inspiration process I just went through and write down what you think about the following websites. From vandelaydesign.com you should analyse the following: journeygroup.com, roll.com, wooten.com.au, elephant-group.com, dealgroup.com, spectre-agency.com. From webneil.com, we aren't going to get into anything because their browsing experience isn't good enough. From dtelepathy, you should visit the following: serlerooteencore.com, dropbox.com, budnitsbicycles.com, freshproduct.at, oakley.com, thrivesolo.com. It's really important you do this exercise and write your thoughts for each website. This is how you'll get better. It's not a matter of how great your notes are, it's all about practicing. So please take the time to do it. Step-by-step approach. From the little I know from drawing with pencil on a piece of paper, I can tell you the best approach is to take it step by step. Don't try to design the whole Mona Lisa at once. Instead, break it down into small, manageable tasks. It's the same process here in web design. I like to work in the following way. Read the brief or the customer's instructions several times until you find out what's important to him. Then look for inspiration. Afterwards, make a sketch, a crude, simple layout based on what you saw in your inspiration website. Then start from the top all the way to the bottom, element by element. Don't move on to the next one until you're happy. The first area will be the header. This generally includes the logo, a phone number, maybe a shopping cart, and the main menu. Don't move down to the hero area until you're confident that these are top-notch quality. Of course, there are some exceptions. The design must create an atmosphere. It should be a whole, not great-looking individual pieces stuck together even though they don't belong. But assuming you are consistent in your design style, spacings, and color scheme, you shouldn't have any issues. Let's talk a bit more about Dribbble.com, Behance.net, or any other type of online gallery that showcases great designs. In these places, you're bound to find incredible projects, and some authors actually create freebies, free PSD files that you can use in your own projects. Some of these are actually amazing, very detailed and high quality. The question you should be asking yourself when you're designing that main menu is this: when finished, will it look like it belongs on Dribbble or Behance? Does it have that premium air to it? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't continue to the next element. Of course, there are exceptions, like we saw in the design of Suthan S, where simple elements come together in a brilliant package. The step-by-step principle is to design amazing-looking elements consistently. That means by using the same design style. For example, if you've started using gradients and drop shadows, then you should use that through the entire design. This step-by-step method is great for another reason. Just in case the project doesn't go through for whatever reason, you're left with great-looking elements that you can adapt and reuse in other projects. Start off small, focusing on one single element, and you'll see everything breaks down into simple shapes and colors. Set your attention on it, show it some love, and when you're very happy with it, only then move on. This is the step-by-step approach. I don't consider myself too good at creating illustrations, but I did manage to create a few nice ones by using this method. For example, this is my Intuos Touch 5 tablet. Good result, but entirely made out of small elements. When you break it down into its core shapes, all of a sudden it's not that scary anymore. The Business Monster is the end result of a tutorial I did for the 99 Designs blog. I know for some of you this might seem simple, yet for some it might be extremely complicated. If you're in that second group, don't worry about it. Use the step-by-step approach and you're bound to create something awesome. Another example is this old-school boombox I actually featured on my blog quite a while ago. I was fed up by the amazing designs I kept seeing on Dribbble, so I decided to do my own thing. This brings you tons of value because this is how you will create custom graphics, a subject we'll cover a bit later on. Though a tablet and a boombox might not be directly useful in your web design projects, these type of graphics have their place in modern websites. That monster, for example, could easily be adapted into some type of mascot. Clients want bespoke, completely custom and unique design elements. And by going this route, you're clearly separating yourself from the pack. So we're going to create an awesome illustration ourselves. The goal is to create an awesome camera icon. This can be done in any perspective, any style, any size, by using inspiration or not, whatever you want. So look for some examples on Dribbble and get to work. Now I'm sure you may be scared of such a big task, but I'd really like to see your end result without you seeing the next video. It's really important you pause the course, because in the next video I'll show you how I would do it. Please don't just stand and watch me work. Either skip over the next lecture until you're ready to perform the exercise by yourself, or pause it right now and jump on it. The next video is not intended to be a side-by-side follow-along video. I'm going to work reasonably fast, so we won't spend hours on it. But then you should try to replicate it. So at the end of it, you should have 2 camera icons. One before seeing the next video, and one that looks nearly identical to the one I'm about to create.